Harold Frederick Shipman was a British doctor and one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. It has been proved that he murdered up to 250 people. On January 31, 2000, a jury found Shipman guilty of 15 murders. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and the judge recommended that he never be released. After his trial, the Shipman inquiry, chaired by Dame Janet Smith, began on September 1, 2000. Lasting almost 2 years, it was an investigation into all deaths certified by Shipman. About 80% of his victims were women. His youngest victim was a 41-year-old man. Much of Britain's legal structure concerning healthcare and medicine was reviewed and modified as a direct and indirect result of Shipman's crimes. Shipman is the only British doctor who has been found guilty of murdering his patients. Shipman died on January 13, 2004, after hanging himself in his cell at Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire. His suicide occurred one day before his 58th birthday. Early life and career: Harold Frederick Shipman was born on the Bestwood Council estate in Nottingham, England, the second of the 4 children of Vera and Harold Shipman, a lorry driver. His working-class parents were devout Methodists. Shipman was particularly close to his mother, who died of lung cancer when he was 17. Her death came in a manner similar to what later became Shipman's own modus operandi. In the later stages of her disease, she had morphine administered at home by a doctor. Shipman witnessed his mother's pain subside despite her terminal condition, up until her death on June 21, 1963. Shipman studied medicine at Leeds School of Medicine and graduated in 1970. He started work at Pontefract General Infirmary in Pontefract, West Riding of Yorkshire, and in 1974 took his first position as a general practitioner at the Abraham Merrod Medical Centre in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. In 1975 he was caught forging prescriptions of pethidine for his own use. He was fined £600, and briefly attended a drug rehabilitation clinic in York. He became a GP at the Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde near Manchester, in 1977. Shipman continued working as a GP in Hyde throughout the 1980s and founded his own surgery at 21 Market Street in 1993, becoming a respected member of the community. In 1983, he was interviewed on the Granada television documentary World in Action on how the mentally ill should be treated in the community. A year after his conviction, the interview was rebroadcast on Tonight with Trevor McDonald. Detection: in March 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds of the Brook Surgery in Hyde, prompted by Deborah Massey from Frank Massey and Sons Funeral Parlour, expressed concerns to John Pollard, the coroner for the South Manchester district, about the high death rate among Shipman's patients. In particular, she was concerned about the large number of cremation forms for elderly women that he had needed countersigned. The matter was brought to the attention of the police, who were unable to find sufficient evidence to bring charges. The Shipman inquiry later blamed the police for assigning inexperienced officers to the case. Between April 17, 1998, when the police abandoned the investigation, and Shipman's eventual arrest, he killed 3 more people. His last victim was Kathleen Grundy, who was found dead at her home on June 24, 1998. Shipman was the last person to see her alive, and later signed her death certificate, recording old age as the cause of death. Grundy's daughter, lawyer Angela Woodruff, became concerned when solicitor Brian Burgess informed her that a will had been made, apparently by her mother. There were doubts about its authenticity. The will excluded her and her children, but left £386,000 to Shipman. Burgess told Woodruff to report it, and went to the police, who began an investigation. Grundy's body was exhumed, and when examined was found to contain traces of diamorphine, often used for pain control in terminal cancer patients. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998, and was found to own a typewriter of the type used to make the forged will. The police then investigated other deaths Shipman had certified, and created a list of 15 specimen cases to investigate. They discovered a pattern of his administering lethal doses of diamorphine, signing patients' death certificates, and then falsifying medical records to indicate that they had been in poor health. Prescription for murder: a book by journalists Brian Whittle and Jean Ritchie, reports two theories on why Shipman forged the will. One is that he wanted to be caught because his life was out of control. The other theory put forward is that he planned to retire at age 55 and then leave the United Kingdom. Trial and imprisonment. Shipman's trial, presided over by Mr. Justice Forbes, began on October 5, 1999. Shipman was charged with the murders of Marie West, Irene Turner, Lizzie Adams, Jean Lilly, Ivy Laumers, Muriel Grimshaw, Marie Quinn, Kathleen Ickstaff, Bianca Pumfret, Nora Nuttall, Pamela Hillier, Maureen Ward, Winifred Mellor, Jo Melia and Kathleen Grundy, all of whom had died between 1995 and 1998. On January 31, 2000, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Shipman guilty of killing 15 patients by lethal injections of diamorphine, and forging the will of Kathleen Grundy. The trial judge sentenced him to 15 consecutive life sentences and recommended that he never be released. Shipman also received 4 years for forging the will. 2 years later, Home Secretary David Blunkett confirmed the judge's whole life tariff, just months before British government ministers lost their power to set minimum terms for prisoners. On February 11, 2000, 10 days after his conviction, the General Medical Council formally struck Shipman off its register. Shipman consistently denied his guilt, disputing the scientific evidence against him. He never made any statements about his actions. His defense tried, but failed, to have the count of murder of Mrs. Grundy, where a clear motive was alleged, tried separately from the others, where no obvious motive was apparent. His wife, Primrose, was apparently in denial about his crimes as well. Although many other cases could have been brought to court, the authorities concluded it would be hard to have a fair trial, in view of the enormous publicity surrounding the original trial. Also, given the sentences from the first trial, a further trial was unnecessary. The Shipman inquiry concluded Shipman was probably responsible for about 250 deaths. The Shipman inquiry also suggested that he liked to use drugs recreationally. Despite the prosecutions of Dr. John Bodkin Adams in 1957, Dr. Leonard Arthur in 1981, and Dr. Thomas Lodwick in 1990, Shipman is the only doctor in British legal history to be found guilty of killing patients. According to historian Pamela Cullen, Adams had also been a serial killer, potentially killing up to 165 of his patients between 1946 and 1956, but as he was found not guilty, there was no impetus to examine the flaws in the system until the Shipman case. Had these issues been addressed earlier, it might have been more difficult for Shipman to commit his crimes. H. G. Kinnell, writing in the British Medical Journal, also speculates that Adams possibly provided the role model for Shipman. Death. Harold Shipman committed suicide by hanging in his cell at Wakefield Prison at 6:20 on January 13, 2004, on the eve of his 58th birthday, and was pronounced dead at 8:10. A prison service statement indicated that Shipman had hanged himself from the window bars of his cell using bed sheets. Some British tabloids expressed joy at his suicide and encouraged other serial killers to follow his example. The Sun ran a celebratory front-page headline, "Ship Ship Hooray!" Some of the victims' families said they felt cheated, as his suicide meant they would never have the satisfaction of Shipman's confession, and answers as to why he committed his crimes. The Home Secretary David Blunkett noted that celebration was tempting, saying, "You wake up and you receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself and you think, is it too early to open a bottle? And then you discover that everybody's very upset that he's done it." Despite the Sun's celebration of Shipman's suicide, his death divided national newspapers, with the Daily Mirror branding him a cold coward, and condemning the prison service for allowing his suicide to happen. The Independent, on the other hand, called for the inquiry into Shipman's suicide to look more widely at the state of Britain's prisons as well as the welfare of inmates. In The Guardian, an article by Sir David Ramsbotham suggested that whole life sentencing be replaced by indefinite sentencing, as these would at least give prisoners the hope of eventual release and reduce the risk of their committing suicide, as well as making their management easier for prison officials. Shipman's motive for suicide was never established, although he had reportedly told his probation officer that he was considering suicide so that his widow could receive a National Health Service pension and lump sum, even though he had been stripped of his own pension. His wife received a full NHS pension, which she would not have been entitled to if he had died after the age of 60. Shipman had been encouraged to take part in courses which would have had him confess his guilt. After refusing, he became emotional and close to tears when privileges including the opportunity to telephone his affair were removed. Privileges had been returned the week before the suicide. Additionally, Primrose, who had consistently believed that Shipman was innocent, might have begun to suspect his guilt. According to Shipman's ex-cellmate Tony Fleming, Primrose had recently written a letter to her husband, exhorting him to tell me everything, no matter what. Aftermath. In January 2001, Chris Gregg, a senior West Yorkshire detective, was selected to lead an investigation into 22 of the West Yorkshire deaths. Following this, the Shipman inquiry into Shipman's activities submitted in July 2002 concluded that he had killed at least 215 of his patients between 1975 and 1998, during which time he practiced in Todmorden, West Yorkshire, and Hyde, Greater Manchester. Dame Janet Smith, the judge who submitted the report, admitted that many more suspicious deaths could not be definitively ascribed to him. Most of his victims were elderly women in good health. In her sixth and final report, issued on January 24, 2005, Smith reported that she believed that Shipman had killed 3 patients, and she had serious suspicions about 4 further deaths, including that of a 4-year-old girl, during the early stage of his medical career at Pontefract General Infirmary in Pontefract, West Riding of Yorkshire. Smith concluded the probable number of Shipman's victims between 1971 and 1998 was 250. In total, 459 people died while under his care, but it is uncertain how many of those were Shipman's victims, as he was often the only doctor to certify a death. The Shipman inquiry also recommended changes to the structure of the General Medical Council. The General Medical Council charged 6 doctors who signed cremation forms for Shipman's victims with misconduct, claiming they should have noticed the pattern between Shipman's home visits and his patients' deaths. All these doctors were found not guilty. Shipman's widow, Primrose Shipman, was called to give evidence about 2 of the deaths during the inquiry. She maintained her husband's innocence both before and after the prosecution. In October 2005, a similar hearing was held against 2 doctors who worked at Tameside General Hospital in 1994, who failed to detect that Shipman had deliberately administered a grossly excessive dose of morphine. A 2005 inquiry into Shipman's suicide found that it could not have been predicted or prevented, but that procedures should nonetheless be re-examined. In 2005, it came to light that Shipman might have stolen jewelry from his victims. Over £10,000 worth of jewelry had been found stashed in his garage in 1998, and in March 2005, with Primrose Shipman pressing for it to be returned to them, police wrote to the families of Shipman's victims asking them to identify the jewelry. Unidentified items were handed to the Assets Recovery Agency in May. In August the investigation ended, 66 pieces were returned to Primrose Shipman and 33 pieces, which she confirmed were not hers, were auctioned. The proceeds of the auction went to Tameside Victim Support. The only piece returned to a murdered patient's family was a platinum diamond ring, for which the family were able to provide a photograph as proof of ownership. A memorial garden to Shipman's victims, called the Garden of Tranquility, opened in Hyde Park on July 30, 2005. As of early 2009, families of the victims of Shipman were still seeking compensation for the loss of their relatives. In September 2009, it was announced that letters written by Shipman during his prison sentence were to be sold at auction, but following complaints from victims' relatives and the media, the letters were removed from sale. In media, Harold and Fred was a 2001 strip cartoon in Viz, also featuring serial killer Fred West. Some relatives of Shipman's victims voiced anger at the cartoon. Shipman, a television dramatization of the case, was made in 2002 and starred James Bolam in the title role. The case was also referenced in an episode of the 2003 television series Diagnosis, Unknown called Deadly Medicine. Shipman's activities also inspired DAW, an episode of the American TV series Law & Order, Criminal Intent. In it, the police investigate a physician who they discover has killed 200 of his patients. See also Jayant Patel, Michael Swango, references. External links, Shipman Inquiry, BBC The Shipman Murders, List of Suspected Murders, Harold Shipman's Clinical Practice 1974-1998, Caso Abierto, Dr. Death, The Shipman Case, Harold Shipman at the Internet Movie Database.